The runway shook violently. A jet erupted in flames after emergency landing. Black smoke billowed upward into the sky. Crackling explosions erupted from the engines. Ground crew ran backward frantically, pulling safety lines behind them. Passengers screamed loudly, scattered everywhere in panic. Fire trucks hadn't arrived yet. At the edge of the runway, a single dad stopped running. He looked toward the cabin door. People still trapped inside screaming. He took off his jacket quickly, wrapped it around his arm tightly. While everyone ran away from danger, he ran forward toward the fire. Someone screamed desperately, "Don't!" And that single moment froze everything completely. Jack Morrison was 42 years old, a maintenance technician at the regional airport, a single dad raising his 9-year-old son, Ben. Jack worked early morning shifts, so he could pick Ben up from school every afternoon, be there for homework, for dinner, for bedtime. The pay was modest, enough to cover rent and groceries, nothing extra. But Jack didn't need extra. He needed stability, the ability to keep a promise he'd made 6 years ago. When Ben's mother died, Jack had held his 3-year-old son and whispered the same words every night since. "Dad comes home, always." Those 3 words had become Jack's code, his religion. Dad comes home, no matter what. He came home to Ben every single day. Ben was afraid of fire, had been since he was 5. A kitchen accident at a neighbor's house. Flames spreading, the smell of smoke. Ben had nightmares for months, still flinched when someone lit a candle. Still asked Jack to check the smoke detectors every week. Jack understood that fear, never dismissed it. He taught Ben about fire safety, about escape routes, about staying low in smoke. Knowledge as armor against fear. This morning had started like any other. Jack dropped Ben at school at 7:45, watched him walk through the gates, then drove to the airport, clocked in at 8:15, started his rounds, checking systems, routine maintenance. At 10:30, the emergency call came through. Charter jet inbound. Hydraulic failure. Emergency landing imminent. Jack moved to his designated position, away from the runway. Safety protocol. He watched the jet approach. Too fast. Too steep. The landing was hard. Violent. Sparks flew as the landing gear buckled. The jet skidded, veered left. Then the smoke started. Black. Thick. Then flames. Bright orange against the morning sky. The emergency siren wailed. Ground crew activated evacuation protocols. Passengers poured out of the forward exits, stumbling down the slides, running across the tarmac. Standard procedure, get everyone clear. Let the fire teams handle it. But Jack saw something through the smoke. The aft cabin door, still closed, and movement behind the window. Someone was still inside, trapped. The fire was spreading, fast, consuming the starboard wing, creeping toward the fuselage. Jack looked around. Fire trucks were approaching, but they were still 30 seconds away, maybe more. 30 seconds was an eternity in a fire. Jack thought about Ben, about picking him up at 3 o'clock, about the promise. Dad comes home, always. But someone was trapped in that plane. Someone's dad. Someone's mom. Someone's child. Jack had 2 choices. Follow protocol, stay back, let the professionals handle it, or break every rule and run toward a burning aircraft. If he ran, if something went wrong, Ben would be waiting at school, and Dad wouldn't come home. The promise would be broken. But if he didn't run, someone else's promise would be broken. Someone else wouldn't make it home. Jack looked at the aft door, at the movement behind the window, at the flames spreading closer. He thought about Ben's nightmares, about his fear of fire, about how Jack had taught him that fear was natural, but courage was choosing to act despite the fear. Jack made his choice. He pulled off his work jacket, ran it under a nearby water station, wrapped it around his arm, and started running. Toward the jet, toward the flames, toward the door where someone was trapped. People shouted at him, "Get back! What are you doing? You're just maintenance." Jack didn't stop, didn't slow down. His boots pounded the tarmac. Heat hit him like a wall, even from 20 feet away. the smell of burning fuel, the roar of flames. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run the other way, to think about Ben. But Jack kept running forward, because someone couldn't run. Someone was trapped. And if he was the only one close enough to help, then the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Jack reached the aircraft. The heat was intense. The wet jacket steamed against his arm. He could see the cabin door, warped, stuck, and through the small window, a flight attendant, pounding on the door, eyes wide with terror, smoke filling the cabin behind her. Jack grabbed the emergency release handle. It was hot, burning, even through the wet fabric. He pulled. Nothing. Pulled again. The door shifted. Barely. One more pull. Harder, using his whole body weight. The door flew open. Heat and smoke poured out. The flight attendant stumbled forward. Jack caught her, pulled her away from the aircraft, toward safety. Behind him, the fire intensified. An explosion. Small but violent. Enough to knock them both forward. They hit the ground. Hard. Jack covered the flight attendant with his body, shielding her from the heat, from the debris. When he looked up, the entire aft section was engulfed, and the runway had gone completely silent. Everyone, ground crew, passengers, emergency responders who'd just arrived, all frozen, staring at the maintenance man who'd run toward the fire when everyone else ran away. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. The operations manager was screaming into his radio, "Get him back! Get that man back now!" 2 firefighters rushed forward, not to fight the fire, to pull Jack away. Jack was still on the ground, still covering the flight attendant, making sure she was breathing. She was coughing, sputtering, but alive. The firefighters grabbed Jack's arms, hauled him to his feet, dragged him back from the aircraft. "What the hell were you thinking?" one of them shouted. Jack didn't answer. He was watching the jet. The flames were spreading, consuming the fuselage. The flight attendant was being loaded onto a stretcher, paramedics swarming her. She'd make it. That's all that mattered. The operations manager reached them. His face was red, furious. "Morrison, what did you just do?" Jack looked at him. "Someone was trapped. That's not your job. You're maintenance. You had no authorization to approach that aircraft." The manager was shaking, not with anger, with fear. "You could have been killed. Do you understand that? You could have died." Jack nodded slowly. "But I didn't. That's not the point." The manager's voice cracked. "You violated every protocol, every safety regulation. You put yourself at risk. You put the rescue teams at risk by making them worry about you." A crowd was gathering. Ground crew, airport staff, passengers who'd been evacuated, all watching, all listening. One of the firefighters stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, he saved that woman's life. We were still 30 seconds out. The cabin was filling with smoke. She wouldn't have made it." The operations manager turned on him. "That doesn't excuse breaking protocol. We have procedures for a reason." Jack stood there, silent, taking it. He understood the manager's anger, understood the fear beneath it. The man was responsible for everyone's safety, and Jack had just done something unpredictable, something dangerous, something that could have gone horribly wrong. "Morrison, you're suspended pending investigation," the manager said. His voice was tight, controlled. "Turn in your badge. Go home. We'll contact you." Jack reached for his badge. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline wearing off, reality setting in. He'd just run into a burning aircraft. He'd just been suspended. He'd just broken the promise to always come home. Because what if it hadn't worked? What if the door hadn't opened? What if the explosion had been bigger? Ben would be at school right now, in class, not knowing his father had just risked everything. A voice cut through the crowd. "Wait!" Everyone turned. The flight attendant was sitting up on the stretcher. Oxygen mask pulled aside. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "That man saved my life." The operations manager looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I understand you're grateful, but—" "No," she interrupted. "You don't understand. The door was jammed. I couldn't get it open. The smoke was getting thicker. I could feel the heat through the wall. I was going to die in there. Her voice broke. I have 2 kids, 7 and 9. They're at school right now. And if this man hadn't... She couldn't finish, started coughing again. The paramedic gently put the oxygen mask back on her face. The operations manager's expression shifted, the anger draining away, replaced by something else. Conflict. Another voice spoke up, one of the senior firefighters. Sir, I need to say something. The manager turned. What? I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of heroes and a lot of stupid decisions. What Morrison did, that was both. He looked at Jack. It was reckless. It violated every rule we have, and it saved a life that would have been lost if he'd waited for us. The firefighter paused. I don't know what the right call is here, but I know this. When I got here and saw him pull her out, I thought, that's what we're supposed to do. That's why we have these jobs, to run toward danger when others can't. The operations manager looked around, at the crowd, at the burning jet behind them, at Jack standing there with burns on his hands and soot on his face. Morrison, the manager said quietly, why did you do it? Jack thought about lying, about saying it was instinct, training, reflex, but he told the truth. Because I'm a father, and so is someone else on that plane, and I'd want someone to run for me, for my son, if I was the one trapped. The manager stared at him, then looked away. Go home, Morrison. We'll figure this out. Jack nodded, started to walk away. The crowd parted, silent. Some faces showed respect. Others showed fear. A few showed something like shame. Jack walked across the tarmac, past the fire trucks, past the emergency vehicles. His hands hurt, his lungs burned, his jacket was ruined, and he'd probably just lost his job. But the flight attendant was alive. Her kids would see her tonight. That had to count for something. Jack reached his car, sat in the driver's seat, looked at the clock. 11:15. 4 hours until he had to pick up Ben. 4 hours to figure out how to explain this. How to tell his son that Dad broke protocol, broke the rules, broke every promise about staying safe, but kept the bigger promise, the one about coming home. Jack started the car and drove away from the airport, away from the fire, toward the only thing that mattered, his son. Jack didn't go home. He drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Ben's school, sat in a corner booth, ordered black coffee he didn't drink. His hands were bandaged now. He'd stopped at a pharmacy, bought gauze and ointment, wrapped the burns himself in the parking lot. They weren't bad, 2nd degree at worst. He'd had worse. The news was already running the story. Jack could see it on the TV mounted above the counter. Aerial footage of the burning jet. The headline, Airport Worker Risks Life in Dramatic Rescue. His phone buzzed. Text messages, emails. People he hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanted to know if he was okay, if it was really him. Jack turned off his phone. He didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to be called a hero. He'd just done what needed to be done. At 1 o'clock, the coffee shop door opened. A man walked in, late 50s, gray hair, wearing a fire department chief's uniform. He spotted Jack immediately, walked over. Mind if I sit? Jack gestured to the empty seat. The chief sat down, extended his hand. Chief Robert Hayes, Airport Fire Department. Jack shook his hand. Jack Morrison. I know who you are, Hayes said. Everyone does now. He paused. I wanted to talk to you, off the record. Jack waited. Hayes leaned forward. The way you moved in that fire, the way you approached the aircraft, read the wind direction, avoided the fuel spillage, knew exactly which door to target. He studied Jack's face. That wasn't luck. That was training. Jack said nothing. So I pulled your file, Hayes continued. Took some digging, but I found it. Jack Morrison, airport firefighter, certified rescue specialist. Worked at Denver International for 6 years. Exemplary record, multiple commendations. Hayes paused. Then you resigned 7 years ago. No explanation in the file. Just gone. Jack looked down at his bandaged hands. Hayes kept talking. I made some calls, talked to your old chief in Denver. He told me what happened. Your wife, the accident, your son. Jack's throat tightened. Ben was 3, Jack said quietly. Sarah died on impact. Drunk driver ran a red light. I was on shift when it happened. Got the call over the radio. He paused. I was pulling someone out of a car fire when my wife was dying 3 miles away. Hayes nodded slowly. And you blame the job? No, Jack said. I blame myself for not being there, for choosing the job over being home. He looked up. Ben needed me. He was terrified, traumatized. He'd lost his mother. I couldn't let him lose his father, too. Not to the job, not to the risk. So you quit, Hayes said. Took a maintenance job. Steady hours, safe work. Home every night. Yes. But you couldn't turn off the training, Hayes said. Couldn't stop seeing what needed to be done. Jack thought about that. About all the times over the past 7 years he'd seen emergencies. Small ones. A car accident on the highway. A house fire in his neighborhood. A kid choking in a restaurant. Every time he'd helped. Quietly. Without announcing his background. Without making it about him. I made a promise to Ben, Jack said. Every night. Dad comes home. Always. That's all that matters. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, did you hesitate? Out there on the runway? When you saw that door? Jack remembered the moment of choice. Thinking about Ben, about the promise, about what would happen if he didn't come home. Yes, Jack admitted. I hesitated. But you ran anyway. Someone was trapped. Someone's kids were going to lose their mother if I didn't. Jack's voice was steady. So I had to choose. Keep my promise to Ben, or keep the promise I made when I became a firefighter, to run toward danger when others can't. Hayes leaned back. That's the choice, isn't it? The one everyone asks about, but nobody really understands unless they've been there. He paused. Your old chief told me something else, about why you were so good. He said you fought fire like you were protecting your own family. Every single time. Jack felt his eyes burn. Not from smoke, from something else. Because I was, Jack said. Every person I pulled out, every life I saved, that was someone's family, someone's dad or mom or kid. I couldn't save Sarah, but I could save them. The truth settled between them. Hayes nodded slowly. The flight attendant you saved today. Her name is Michelle Torres. 2 kids, like she said, 7 and 9. He pulled out his phone, showed Jack a photo, a woman with 2 children, smiling. The photo was from Michelle's social media, posted this morning before her flight. Those kids have a mother tonight because you broke protocol, Hayes said, because you remembered who you were, even after 7 years of pretending to be someone else. Jack stared at the photo. 2 kids, dark hair, bright smiles, hugging their mom. I'm not a hero, Jack said. I'm just a dad who couldn't walk away. That's exactly what a hero is, Hayes said. He stood up, put a card on the table. If the airport fires you, when things settle, call me. We're always looking for people who run forward. He paused. And for what it's worth, your son is lucky because his dad kept both promises today. He ran toward danger, and he came home. Hayes left. Jack sat there, holding the card, thinking about Ben, about what he'd say when he picked him up, about whether 7-year-old promises still counted when you broke them to keep someone else alive. His phone buzzed again. He turned it back on. One new message from an unknown number. Jack opened it. It was a photo. Michelle Torres in the hospital, bandaged, oxygen tube in her nose, but smiling. The text below read, My kids wanted me to tell you thank you. They don't know what that means yet, but someday they will. You gave me someday. Michelle. Jack closed his eyes, breathed deeply. Breathed. The burns on his hands throbbed. His lungs still ached from the smoke. His job was probably gone. But 2 kids still had their mother, and Jack still had time to pick up his son, to keep the promise that mattered most. Dad comes home, always, even when the path home runs straight through fire. At 2:45, Jack pulled into the school parking lot. Early, he always was. Other parents were arriving, minivans, SUVs, Normal people living normal lives. Jack sat in his old sedan, hands bandaged, smelling like smoke despite changing shirts. The news was still running the story. He could see it on someone's phone as they walked past his car. The video had gone viral. Jack Morrison, airport hero. Except he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd made a choice and was still figuring out if it was the right one. The school bell rang. Kids poured out, laughing, running, free. Ben appeared, backpack bouncing, looking for Jack's car. He spotted it, waved, ran over. Jack got out, bent down. Ben crashed into him, hugged him tight. "Dad, you're early." "I'm always on time," Jack said. Ben pulled back, looked at Jack's hands, at the bandages. What happened? Jack had practiced this, in his head, in the coffee shop, in the car. But now looking at his son's worried face, the practiced words disappeared. "There was a fire at work," Jack said simply. "Someone needed help. So I helped." Ben's eyes went wide. A fire? Like a big fire? Jack saw the fear. The same fear that had lived in Ben since he was 5. Since the neighbor's kitchen. Since the nightmares. "Yes," Jack said honestly. "A big one." Ben's voice dropped to a whisper. "Were you scared?" Jack thought about lying, about being the brave dad, the fearless father, but he chose truth. "Yes, I was very scared." "But you helped anyway?" "Yes." Ben looked at the bandages again, then up at Jack's face. "Because that's what you do." It wasn't a question, it was understanding. Jack felt something break inside his chest. "Yes, that's what I do." They got in the car, buckled up, started driving home. Ben was quiet for a few minutes. Then he said, "Mom would be proud." Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You think so?" "Yeah, because you came home. You always come home." Jack pulled over, stopped the car, looked at his son. "Ben, I need to tell you something. What I did today was dangerous. I broke rules. I might lose my job, and I'm sorry if that scares you." Ben thought about that, then said, "Did the person you helped come home too?" "Yes." "Then it was worth it." Jack stared at his 9-year-old son, at the wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. But did, because Ben had lost his mother, had learned early that coming home wasn't guaranteed. "You're right," Jack said. "It was worth it." They drove home. No fanfare, no celebration, just a father and son. Going home, like they did every day. That evening, Jack's phone rang. The airport. He answered. It was the operations manager. "Morrison, we've completed the preliminary review." Jack waited. "You violated protocol. That's not in question. But the board has decided not to terminate you. Instead, you're being reassigned." Jack's breath caught. "To what?" "Fire safety training. You'll develop new protocols for emergency response. Work with our fire department. Train ground crews." The manager paused. "Chief Hayes recommended you. Said you know things we need to learn." Jack didn't know what to say. "There's one condition," the manager continued. "You design the training, but you also take it. Full recertification as airport firefighter. If you're going to teach people to run toward fire, you need to be ready to run with them." Jack thought about Ben, about the promise, about coming home. "I'll need flexible hours. School pickup is non-negotiable." "Done," the manager said. "We're adding that to the policy. For everyone. Parents shouldn't have to choose between being there and being here." Jack closed his eyes. "I accept." "Good. Start Monday." The call ended. Jack sat there, phone in hand, bandaged hands, smoke still in his lungs, but employed, still able to provide, still able to be there for Ben. He walked into the kitchen. Ben was at the table, homework spread out. "Dad, did you lose your job?" "No, I got a new one." Ben grinned. "Cool. Can you help me with math?" And just like that, life was normal again. Except it wasn't. Because tomorrow someone would read the new training manual Jack would write, would learn from what happened today, would be ready the next time someone was trapped. The power hadn't shifted because Jack was rewarded. It shifted because the system learned, because protocol changed, Because one person running toward fire had reminded everyone else why the job existed. Not to follow rules, but to save lives. Even when the rules said to stay back. 6 months later, Jack stood in front of a training class. 20 airport personnel, ground crew, security, maintenance workers, people who might one day face what he'd faced. Emergency response isn't about being fearless, Jack said. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway, because someone needs you to. He showed them the photo, the burning jet, the moment frozen in time. This is what panic looks like. This is what happens when systems fail, when protocol meets reality. Then he showed another photo, Michelle Torres with her kids, smiling, alive. This is why we train, not for the aircraft, for them. The class was silent, attentive, learning. After class, a young maintenance worker approached. "Mr. Morrison, I just wanted to say, my dad was a firefighter. He died on the job when I was 8. The young man's voice was steady. "I used to be angry that he ran toward danger, that he chose the job over coming home." He paused, but after hearing your story, I understand now. He didn't choose the job over me. He chose to make sure other kids still had their dads. Jack felt his throat tighten. "Your father would be proud of you." The young man nodded, walked away. Jack packed his materials, checked his watch. 2:30, time to pick up Ben. Some things never changed. He drove to the school, parked in his usual spot. The video from that day had 20 million views now. People recognized him sometimes, called him hero. Jack didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father who'd made a choice and kept a promise. Ben came running out, taller now, growing fast, still afraid of fire, still checking smoke detectors, but understanding more each day. "How was school?" Jack asked. "Good. We learned about heroes today. Real ones, not superheroes." Ben buckled his seatbelt. "My teacher showed a video of you." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. "What did you think?" Ben was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think you were scared, but you ran anyway, because someone needed you to come home. So you helped them. Then you came home to me." Jack looked at his son. "That's exactly right. That's what being a dad means, right? You always come home, but sometimes you help other people come home first." Jack couldn't speak, could only nod. They drove home, past the airport, past the spot where everything changed. Jack glanced at the runway as they passed. A jet was taking off. Smooth, safe, normal. Because of training, because of protocol, because one day someone had run forward when everyone else ran back. That night, Jack tucked Ben into bed. The old ritual, the old promise. "Dad comes home," Jack said. "Always," Ben finished. But then Ben added something new. "And sometimes Dad helps other dads come home too." Jack kissed his son's forehead, turned off the light, stood in the doorway watching him sleep. Safe, secure, knowing his father would always come home, because that was the promise, the one that mattered more than protocol, more than rules, more than fear. Jack went downstairs, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. Tomorrow he'd teach another class, help another group understand that running toward fire wasn't about being brave. It was about remembering why you were there, to protect, to serve, to make sure people came home. A letter sat on the table, from Michelle Torres. She wrote every month, updates about her kids, how they were doing, what they were learning. This month's letter ended with a line that made Jack's eyes burn. "My daughter asked me today what a hero looks like. I showed her your picture. Then I showed her a mirror. Because heroes are the people who help other people come home. And because of you, I came home and taught her what that means." Jack folded the letter, put it with the others, a stack of reminders of why the choice mattered, of why running forward was never wrong, even when everyone else ran back. He finished his coffee, turned off the lights, went upstairs, checked on Ben one more time. Still sleeping, still safe, still his reason for everything. Dad comes home, always, even when the path runs through fire, especially then. If this story moved you, subscribe to Daddy Healing Stories. We tell the stories of fathers who run forward when others run back, who keep promises even when it costs everything, who understand that being a hero isn't about fearlessness. It's about being afraid and choosing love anyway. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because every father's choice to run toward danger, to keep someone else's family whole, deserves to be remembered. These are the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.